Today we have Eoin Wickens with us. Um, Welcome on. How are you?
Doing good. Yeah. Thanks a million for having me, guys. And happy Easter, I suppose, to you all and anybody else who's watching.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's a special time, I guess, special episode or something. Um, awesome. So yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you'd like to share with us or talk about?
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, my name's Owen Wickens. I'm the director of threat intelligence at a company called Hidden Layer, where we focus on securing all things artificial intelligence from supply chain to inference time and whatnot. My background, I guess, is I get initially as a malware reverse engineer and threat intel researcher. And then about 3 years ago, I made the switch into, I guess, AI security or security for AI, because that can mean one of two things, using AI for offense or trying to actually defend AI models against attack. So, yeah, been pretty busy the last few years. It's a full-time job trying to keep up with this stuff, and even then, new stuff that changes the paradigm is released pretty much every week. And with that, I guess so too does the risk also evolves almost in lockstep with it. And then it's kind of our responsibility to do that keeping up and ensure that we're able to, I guess, mitigate risk as much as we can and advocate for places or improvements in the aspects where we might be, lacking a little bit at the minute. But yeah, that's me.
Awesome. I think I'll do something perhaps slightly counterintuitive, but I'm curious to start with the latest side of that equation. I feel like, you know, everybody here can probably wrap their mind around like the are we already at the classical AI security phase where hey, prompt injection, I think we've kind of all seen like that basic stuff. I'm
Yeah.
curious with the recent hotness of agents. I feel like the bar also goes a little bit higher around the risk. Has that changed how you see security? How like you go and you implement security? How do you think about it? All that stuff.
Oh, this is great because it's almost like you asked me questions on a slide deck I'm preparing right now. So thank God. But yeah, no, it's really interesting. So maybe like last week, I saw an article where somebody was talking about the agentic era, and they reference classic Gen AI security, and I said to myself, "Wow, are we actually here already?" I mean, the field hasn't been around that long to start calling it classic, but yeah, I mean, it's evolved. I think, LLMs by themselves are, when they're prompt injected, I can get it to give me, the recipe how to make a bomb or one of those classic prompt injection, examples. But it doesn't have like consequence. It's only when the LLM is hooked up to other systems and that has like a risk profile or a threat model that you start to actually see, the potential for that LLM to be abused, and then it causes some sort of like impact or material impact to an organization. So, we saw that with like LLMs in the first wave, I guess, into like chatbots and into like coding assistants and that sort of thing. And you have reputational harms, you've got like the vulnerabilities being introduced through LLMs. But agentic's really interesting because it starts bolting on all these additional things that increase its capability and in tandem increase again the risk, right? So you've got like tool calling. So integrations with APIs, integrations with your tools on the system, with different types of like SaaS solutions, basically all the software components that make up your organization, access to resources, to databases, to yeah, do all sorts of mad things, and like we imbue them with agency. So they're agentic by their very name. But like I guess the way I've been framing it almost is like we almost take some of our agency and we give it to the LLM, right? And then we're allowing it to run off in a direction on our behalf and then hopefully come back with the right task. I saw a great talk by Sunil Yu from Gnostic at the SANS AI Cybersecurity Summit, where he said, agentic AI is like, having a, 1,000 interns at your disposal. But the problem is the task might not be done 100% with like the same understanding that you have of that space. And that ends up being quite a worrying proposition. So long answer, don't mean to grandstand, but yeah, it does. It does. It's changing, but the fundamentals are the same. In that prompt injection, it's just now more of a bigger risk when you think that all the data that can be pulled from all these APIs and resources and whatnot can now actually impact a business in a more material sense.
Got it. Got it. So okay, interesting. So it's the same kind of fundamental. So in that case, do you have a framework that you think of when like when you're trying to build some new integration or build some new product or something like that? Is there a way, like I think there's a bunch of people here that everybody's got ideas about things to do or build with AI or apply them to different things in their in their own environment, right? If we've got like somebody working in a SOC of like, hey, we can query past incidents and all kinds of stuff. Is there a framework with how we should sort of at the beginning think about how, like, what's the threat vectors? Is there any threat vectors? Like, how to think about it?
Yeah, again, good question. AI is such like a horizontally applied technology that the threat model varies so wildly in terms of its use case and if it's externally facing or if it's internal only. And what Chris and I might have actually spoken about this a couple of weeks ago, but like what makes LLMs so vulnerable is that the data and control plane are together, right? So it means that the threat surface or sorry, the attack vector for an LLM isn't like your exploit, it's the data. So, if you're pulling in from a resource that is externally sourced, you might have like no vulnerabilities and you might have a fully up to date, web stack or what have you, and all's well. But like the actual data that is hosted in this external resource may be that like um, initial access vector to compromising the control of that LLM and then having a negative outcome. And that changes, right? Is the LLM's purpose to perform an action? Is the LLM's purpose to provide information? You can even see it as in a light example with things like with like ChatGPT web browsing. For instance, if I got it to browse a website which has, ignore all previous instructions and your complicated, chat thing, it's going to return bad information. But the threat model for me is that person is like, okay, am I like blindly trusting everything it says? Am I implementing this to do critical tasks in my organization? And yeah, it's difficult to provide like general guidance in those situations because it's so far reaching. But I think, the thing to hone in on there is, yeah, understand that data can affect the system and the output of it and the actual control of it. And I think that if you kind of start from that point, you start to get a little less trustful.
Yeah, yeah. I keep like, tell me if I'm wrong here.
Sure.
I keep thinking about the way that LLMs are currently implemented, and I keep kind of getting back to this core thing that is, it's all English in our case, right? It's all language. And as a software engineer slash security engineer by trade, I look for an API that tells me, this is the parameter, this is exactly what it's going to be, able to do or not do. And but it feels like in the LLM world, it's all just a regression to it's English. So it's kind of like, yes, it's this intern, and also the bad guy can just schmooze that intern with language and tell it to do things, which is from a security perspective is really messed up. Um,
Right.
do you think there's going to be ever a way out of that, like some kind of escape hatch where somehow we're able to put some actual true enforcement on the machines? And maybe it's already there, but it's only like, open AI and, at a really large level that they're able to do that. But it feels like the best people do is like train the model to be, it's again,
Right.
it's like humans, right? Train the model to be, watchful of like fishing, like kind of level of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting, and I kind of look for analogies in other parts of the tech industry that have already kind of had this, pop up as a problem. And one of the things I look to is like content moderation, right? All language, in various forms in various languages, have we been able to successfully moderate? Not really. So we end up having to create tools and platforms to enable moderation by bespoke, like by communities or users. And sure, we can catch a lot of negative content in ways, and pattern matching, additional security solutions, whatever. But like that's still maybe 60, 70%, and the rest of it is new, novel. It's creative. It's like, getting the bypassing the filter in your, massively multiplayer online game by, messing up the way you spell a swear word, right? Like you bypass these types of filtering all the time. So I think what it needs then really is like, since it can't be addressed by the provider, and since it's such a, again, horizontally applied solution, it's why we've kind of angled to go for this like third party layer on top of models to kind of enable that configurability and that kind of more bespoke tailoring and moderation as such. And like I use moderation, it's more of a safety analogy, but within the context of security, I guess security is contextual. So yeah, you can kind of see the parallel there.
I like it. I feel like just using that word, reframing it as moderation, kind of reframes it from the classical like cyber, defense, like, I filter port 22 so nobody can connect from the outside, to this
Yeah.
more like vague approach. Do you
Right.
have examples of, obviously, not going to customers or anything like that, but like examples of the types of ways that you've defended some types of products, or like, things that you're building?
Yeah, it's a good question. What can I say here? I think like one of the best ways that we've been able to get ahead of attacks is by actually developing them. And what we've done really is like stack out our research team pretty significantly with some incredibly bright people to do that, right? To find new ways of exploiting LLMs, to come up with new ways of prompt injecting and jailbreaking so that we can actually serve to be a more proactive organization in implementing like, safeguards and security controls. I think what the industry is kind of referring to as like AI firewalls or like detection response or whatnot. I guess like also like part of that too has been through, red teaming of systems to understand again, like their specific context for that deployment, trialing a lot of the attacks that we have that we've built up over time. And then once that's, concluded, then taking what we've learned, implementing that in the product, and then implementing the product in the environment to ensure that, attacks like these don't happen again. I think like you only get so far by using like run-of-the-mill tools, or I guess like the open source tooling, because what it's kind of like this like sign your own homework equation. And we kind of saw that with like benchmarking, right? If the benchmarks are public, you train your models to optimize towards the benchmarks. And what I would say, and again, I'm a huge fan of open source and I don't mean to knock it, and sometimes I feel like I knock it too much. But if I have access to everything that I'm being tested on, I just make sure it's resilient to that. And I think, there's a point at which the test it has to evolve in order to ensure that security. And look, I mean, red teaming is super contextual. Protection for different companies is contextual as well. So that's been quite interesting. And like, that's at the inference side. So, post deployment of models and whatnot. But like, I think we were speaking just before this started, like there's a whole swath of like supply chain risk as well that's introduced, which kind of gets messy. There's one thing I just wanted to say as well with regards to you're talking about like, not as simple as like blocking like port 22. And like, there's a beautiful simplicity now almost in the determinism of like the software stack that we've been dealing with. And there's also a beautiful non-determinism of LLMs, and that the more like the fact that they are non-deterministic, through adjusting temperatures and whatnot, makes them really capable. However, it makes it really unpredictable. And as you said, we end up in this like kind of like murky gray area that is, I feel like, machine learning in a way. Like if you have a model that can be deterministic, then do you even need a model in the first place? So yeah, it's been quite a mindset shift for me to just have to be, trusting in percentages rather than absolutes.
Right, right, right. Nice. Do you have so you
Fuzzy.
mentioned the red teaming side of it. Do
Yeah.
you have some interesting, what's the coolest way that, that you've tried to do like a red teaming or that you've seen some attack work? I love war stories, so I'm just curious if you've got any, cool thing that you've seen.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't want to go into too many specifics because it would yeah. But yeah, we've had some cool effects with, predictive and generative AI systems. Gen AI being prompt based, predictive being, I guess more like, classification, forecasting, that sort of thing. We've had successes with, I guess bypassing classifiers that enable us to do some pretty mad stuff, be it, actually conduct fraud in a financial setting or, basically skirt below thresholds or what have you. The real fun stuff though is definitely in the Gen AI. I mean, getting a reputable company to start recommending their direct competitors, to start trying to sell you products for, nothing or very little that maybe may or may not exist. And I guess, like you could say like, okay, what's the real harm in that? You have like an LLM saying something on the company's behalf, like who cares? But like, looking back to the Air Canada lawsuit, which I guess is maybe kind of relevant to you all. Like, if you, I guess for a refresher for folks, the Air Canada thing was, I think they were due to be refunded for a flight, or they got onto Air Canada to try and I think yeah sort something out with their flight, and essentially, oh, we have the link here. Thank you very much. They promised a discount that wasn't available, and then this person, what's his name, Jake Moffat, took him to court and lost. And Air Canada lost, and they basically were trying to argue that the AI is an independent entity, and then they said no, the AI is actually a spokesperson for your company. You have to honor the terms of what you said. Right. So all of a sudden, if I'm able to get some goods that cost, multiple tens of thousands of dollars for as little as €2 or $2 Canadian, I suppose, then yeah, I mean it's pretty exciting stuff. There's definitely some better stories. I'm kind of more on the threat intel side. We've a prof services team that does God's work there. But yeah.
Gotcha, gotcha. Have you seen, you kind of mentioned, there's like the reputational attacks. Have you observed actual attacks that are more on the classical cybersecurity side of things, that allowed somebody to gain access to something? Like, have you actually observed those, or there's still a lot of, we know people are going to try, so we pen test, and like that's really the core of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, so going towards like classical attacks, there's a lot of analogies really in AppSec to this, kind of quite a big portion of what we look at when we talk about like the security of ML models and the security of the libraries that load them and deploy them and serve them and whatnot. And I think we like, yeah, malware in models has been one that we've really noticed. We've seen, even up until the last couple of days, we've seen reverse shells and PowerShell reverse shells and post exploitation frameworks and all sorts of stuff bundled inside the models, and then like hosted. And that's, it's an interesting attack vector. Again, you could say, okay, well, is this AppSec? And yeah, it is, but these are like different new formats, quite wide in their disparity. You've got probably like 20 or 30 different file formats in use for storing or serializing machine learning models. And all of them can be abused in different ways. So, we can get, run Python code in Keras Lambda layers. We can, exploit the Pickle virtual machine to, basically do the similar function with object serialization. We can do path traversal in Onyx. We can do hijack Ginger templates in GGOF files, and the list goes on. So that's been quite interesting. But I guess, yeah, another kind of like more real worldy thing. A lot of the MLOps tools that we've looked at, that so we have a vulnerability research team in Hidden Layer that has been looking at that pretty much now for, I guess, the best part of a year. We found quite a number of MLOps frameworks that don't have things like authentication or are vulnerable to CSRF or SSRF. We've got full exploit chains and some of these, and then we've noticed, a lot of the industry also finding these vulnerabilities. And then we noticed, I think there was an article by Oligo Security called Shadow Ray, and it was basically the exploitation of the Ray framework. And the Ray is used for ML development and serving and whatnot. And I remember reading the vulnerability disclosure, right, for this particular attack, and you could basically post a job, so like think code execution, to a Ray server unauthenticated over HTTP, and it was argued then that this is a feature and not a bug. And again, this comes down to, like, I guess, education, and like I am like, it's the recommend. Well, I guess in that particular instance, the developers said, "Hey, this isn't supposed to be exposed to the internet. Like, this is a feature. Like, it's on you." But at the same time, there were exposed Ray servers. And what Oligo wrote about was that these Ray servers were being exploited in the wild that day, or not that day, but at that point in time. And crypto miners are being installed on them. So you think about AI, you think about ML, you think about what's like the big thing that you need to do AI and ML at scale, or for cryptocurrency, it's GPUs. So you have this like like huge intersection of the Venn diagram for, like, interested targets. Like, if I know, or if I'm an adversary and I know you're running an absolute load of compute, then like that's a high value target. So, I think the incentive is there. And I've said before in the past, I mean, like, like this, that, installing crypto miners, we've all seen is like often like a spray and pray type attack. They just try and, attack, the latest CVE or the latest vulnerability, and spread it. But, what happens when we end up with like a massive data center that ends up getting hijacked and somebody runs like a crypto miner on it? Or if we end up with like some of this massive AI training compute, like, the Stargate project that's being built, or X and their Austin data center, is it like a giga center or something that they're referring to it as? Like, imagine if like somebody managed to get crypto miner on there. But imagine if somebody managed to steal like a frontier model. Like, the what we're like playing with now is like almost like, on one side of it, it's business critical, and one side of it's like hugely material impact if like somebody runs a crypto miner and costs you tens of millions. But like, what happens if like one of those frontier models gets stolen and, ends up leaking to yeah, it becomes like an issue of national security almost on the flip side. And I don't know, I've been in this space 3 years. I might have gone a bit snowblind with it, but I just feel like there's mass incentive and like mass need to mitigate risk in these areas because of the amounts of resources being funneled into them, and what that means for folks. But yeah, I don't want to digress too much. Sorry.
No, that's interesting for sure. And like somebody, posted, like, is network segmentation a thing in neural networks? I mean, that's, yeah, I think it's we're going to be rediscovering over the next few years all the lessons that we've had in cybersecurity, but just
Yeah.
applied in a different way. And so, do you think it's going to help or hinder or neutral, the, what do they call it? I want to say MCP, that came out around agentic, like, API gateways for agents to use tools, roughly speaking.
Hmm.
What do you think that's going to change anything?
I mean, like, my take on it is that MCP and A2A is almost in a way redefining the web. It's like a new era of the internet. We've had APIs. Now we have MCP servers. I see calls from folks that we need centralized registries for MCP servers. I've seen folks that we need to treat MCP almost like a new protocol. And it's interesting. And like we think of like A2A and agent to agent communication. And like if I like, let's look ahead 5, 10 years. Are we going to have agents communicating with each other en masse? Will we have representative agents for us being able to delegate our tasks, handle things on our behalf, but communicating across web with one another in this structured form? And yeah, so will it change things? 100%. I do think it is where things are going because again, we're dealing with text and we're dealing with like interpretation, but MCPs, and I saw this, it was from a great post that unfortunately I'm going to not be able to remember the author of, but referring to MCP almost as the USB for AI and like internet connectivity. And I thought that was really interesting and a nice analogy for how to understand that. But yeah, I do think like we've already seen loads of security issues. There's been what was it, a tool something, MCP tool poisoning attacks. We've seen the evolution of people scanning for these things. We've seen, like, okay, what happens if you have a confused deputy problem now where your MCP server has like tons of privileges and can now leak out your data? Or does it have authentication built in if you have an MCP for your Jira, for your Google Drive? Does it have the right access levels or permission levels? And again, the web gets ever wider and we end up trying to catch up. But I think that's just the way it's going to go. I mean, like, it is progress. It is where things need to go for the evolution of AI. I've said before, we're probably moving faster than we ever have in security, trying to keep up with it. We can be proactive in areas, but we're going to be playing reactive in others. And I think there's a lot of fun for folks as well, kind of being able to take these like older skills and reapply them again and get to redesign these paradigms. I think there's a real almost like builder mentality right now in the security for AI space that has like a certain energy about it. Like our yeah, it's definitely something that I've enjoyed trying to help secure.
That's cool. That's a really it's a nice positive note because I had a little bit of a whiplash there because when you said like, are we, am I as a person going to have like my own, MCP gateway for people to interact with me, agents to interact with sort of my world? I like my first thought was like, oh, that blows my mind. That's amazing. That's so cool. And then I thought, oh God, how does like permission, like how that security level work? And that's incredibly scary. But as you kind of round it up into, yeah, we're in a builder phase of things, and in some ways I bet there's a lot of parallels to, yeah, to the early internet of, let's build HTTP and then at some point somebody's going to figure out, cross-site scripting and, all these things and just we have to rebuild a lot of this. So that's super cool. Thanks a lot for coming and that discussion. That was really interesting. Is there a, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, is there a better way, if they have questions or want to keep discussion going or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, always feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. My email is Owen at Hidden Layer if anybody wants to hit me up directly. Yeah, always happy to chat or run some ideas. Thanks a million for having me. Really appreciate it. Great conversation as always.
Awesome,
Thanks so much,
awesome.
Owen.
Thank you.
Yes, and thanks everybody for coming in, listening to the chat. You can also keep going on community.limacharlie.io. We have a bunch of like related chats there, and we will see you next week. All right, thanks everybody.